Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Find our previous episodes in our YouTube channel. It's where we archive everything on youtube.com and search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Find out more about our Tuesday morning group coalition group and the work we've done on moving real policy forward in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Up next, Policy Director with Clean Virginia, Lizzie Hylton, is on with us. We're going to talk State Corporation Commission and the bill structures, Dominion trying to have the ability to look gregarious while still collecting bills during the COVID-19 shutdowns. Lizzie, thank you for taking some time out with us this week. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thrilled to be joining you. I think we're both in Charlottesville, although, all stuck in our homes and offices. Yes.
And you can read more about this at cleanvirginia.org. That's your website. The Dominion scam and then the SCC extending the ban on utility service disconnects. And it all sounds good in headline form, but it doesn't mean that your bills are foregone, even if you've lost your job for 3, 4, 5 months, however long the governor continues to keep businesses shut down or severely restricted, correct? I mean, you're still going to have to pay Dominion eventually.
Right. So that's exactly right, how it works. So right now, and this is set to expire on June 15th, which is, this upcoming Monday. So, I think by the time this airs, there might be a little more out on what decision the State Corporation Commission made. But yes, so you still have to pay Dominion or, your co-op or APCO, at least under current law. So there has been a moratorium in place. So because so many families and businesses are stuck at home or unable to open and therefore have not had the same income or revenue streams, there's been a moratorium throughout the state preventing any disconnections because of delinquent payments and also preventing any collection of late fees. And so, honestly, something we'd love to see, the General Assembly is going to be meeting. I think the governor said yesterday that they will be convening in early August. And so I think this is a question that, it will really be left up to them. And I think nearly 60 legislatures of both Democrats and Republicans filed something with the State Corporation Commission, essentially saying this, that, we want to be able to look at this in a special session because, we might need to write new laws and have the legislature actually take action to figure out, a fair way for people to, eventually deal with these outstanding bills.
And this story in an abstract is kind of why every time I get somebody telling me we need the government to create utility-style internet for our homes, I said, when was the last time you had a good experience with your electric company? And I'm not slagging the electric company specifically, but this is what you get when you get these government-created monopolies.
Yeah, and I think that last thing you said is really the crux of this, and this is sort of, kind of what Clean Virginia does, and we work closely with the Virginia Institute of Public Policy, on this issue a lot because, what really does make these institutions unique is that they are monopolies. And so, everything about them is just completely different from when you would think about, any other company that you interact with, in your daily life, where you have choice. So if you don't like one company, you can go somewhere else.
Right.
If you don't like their political giving, you don't have to give them your money because you don't like who they give their money to. None of that exists with monopolies. And the other aspect of that, which is what really hurts Virginians, is that, the incentive structure for monopolies is totally different. So, in a free market, you have every incentive to cut costs because if you don't cut costs, your competitor will, and they will undersell you. And,
amen.
And exactly, that's how we get lower prices. But when you're a monopoly, for Dominion, they get a guaranteed profit on anything they spend. So, it's about 9.2% right now for most of their projects. So if they spend $100 million, they make that all back. And the way they make it back is we get charged it in our energy bills. and then they also make that guaranteed profit. So there's just no incentive to do things cheaply or to do things like, energy efficiency, which is, very important for a lot of reasons, but, would help us all use less electricity and therefore have lower bills. But there's just no incentive to do it because, the more they spend, the more they profit. And so it's all just, so different from the way, every other company you probably interact with works. And that is what makes it, I think very unique when we're now looking at, what's a fair way to handle this as we are coming out of, this economic crisis.
We've covered a little bit over the past couple of years the Texas model of deregulating the electric industry, sort of trying to take a cue from the way we did it with the telephone industry, and that's run into problems, I know, over the last year and a half or so, perhaps more because of human error than the concept being bad. But also Dominion, works both sides of the coin. They like to sell their excess energy into the national grid for higher costs than us. So, they try to incentivize us not using electricity so that they have more left over to send to New York and into Pennsylvania as well through the grid.
Yeah. And this is, I think something that is just so, again, unique about them. And what you said about the telecoms is just such a great example of how we've gone through this transition. And this is something, we are big believers in and work with a large, coalition of groups, from sort of every political persuasion on, which is, Dominion right now, it's not just a monopoly, it is a vertically integrated monopoly. So they control, the actual production of energy, they control the distribution of energy, and, they control all the grids, all the wires, so really completely from, point A to point Z, every step of that is owned by them. And then on top of that, as you mentioned, they also get to sell into the PJM market to other states as well. And so, what we have been, working with the Virginia Institute of Public Policy and all these, at a large, as I mentioned, other stakeholder groups in what we call FERC, which is the Virginia Energy Reform Coalition, is saying, it makes sense to have a monopoly on distribution of energy. So, just owning the grids, right? That is something that still makes sense. But the monopoly on generation, that made sense maybe 100 years ago when you just needed so much infrastructure and so much capital to actually build and create energy that could then be sold onto the grid. But now, because of, technology developments, and again, it's exactly what happened with the telecom industry, just they're a little bit ahead of us in terms of technological development. But, anyone can put solar on their house, right? It's not, you don't need the same, amount of capital investment you would need for a coal plant, which would obviously, it's not something everyone could, or most, people could do on their house. And so, and when you have a more distributed energy generation sources, so you have a lot of people and a lot of hospitals and colleges and businesses, everyone who's got a big parking lot, they can put solar,
They can do lots of things.
An awning, on their roof.
You got a river in your backyard, you can run a little generator.
I love that.
And Lizzie,
and it makes the grid a lot more secure.
It makes it more, because it breaks it up, it decentralizes it, it makes it one less choke point. But also, Lizzie, as Clean Virginia, the name of your organization, it also empowers companies that say, hey, I've got a good idea towards less impactful generation of energy. You can reward them by going and using their electricity because you like, how they're generating it and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's, the choice aspect of this is so crucial and just is, very far from the system we currently have. And we are an organization that cares a lot about clean energy. And, I know we might disagree with some of your listeners maybe on that, but, I think we all can agree that it would be better to have choice and,
yes,
a lot of renewable energy when you don't have a monopoly controlling it, because whenever the monopoly gets involved, the incentive is to spend as much as possible. But if you just look at the actual technology itself, it has come so far over the last decade and 2 decades in terms of affordability. And so, there's very cheap ways to start building energy generation. And, we could be doing that and people could actually own it themselves and businesses could own it themselves instead of having to, pay a bill to someone else. So.
bring up a great point as well, triggering me. It's a good kind of triggering. But it's one of those misconceptions that somebody is a conservative that we're for polluting. We want clean rivers and clean air and full rich forests, and we just don't see some of the public policy that these democratic monopolies that these electric utilities have become and these electric generation companies have become. We've been doing this dance for 20 years and we haven't gotten really substantively cleaner generation.
Yeah, and this is something too, these monopolies, and I think this is why they have been so successful, is that they have just sort of, for a very, very long time, had overwhelming support of, honestly, most of the elected representatives of both parties, and certainly the leadership of both parties. But that is something that has definitely started to change. So, a big part of the work that we do at Clean Virginia is trying to encourage our legislators to stop taking money from, the monopolies that they are in charge of regulating, because they play a specific role in setting the prices, since, the prices are not set by a market. And, I think in 2015, there were one or two legislators who, had a principal stance, refused this type of money, which, again, is illegal in 27 states. So it's not a crazy idea.
I'd say it should be illegal everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. And so it's now up to 50. So there has been a real momentum, I think, around this issue, which is on both sides, which has been exciting. And, one of the big successes of Texas, which is, to my knowledge, and I'm not an expert on Texas, but I don't think they've ever, subsidized, green or clean energy sources down there. But Texas has, the second highest renewable generation in the country, because, wind, when you do it on land, it is very cheap. They have a lot of land in Texas. So and also, it's been a huge success story, both from a consumer, price aspect and also just from a green energy aspect as well.
Well, and decentralizing it also gives a smaller company. I mean, we hear, Dominion wants to put 30, wind turbines on the top of the Blue Ridge Parkway, ironically, and it's protested by the same folks that are against the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. So, I mean, you can't win for losing sometimes. But I get why you don't want 30 wind turbines up there either. But massive companies need to do massive things. Little companies can say, hey, we've got this wind turbine here. It's powering this neighborhood, and that's all we need to do. And people pay us for the electricity it generates. The same thing we've seen with Wi-Fi hotspots created in small rural neighborhoods that are, brought in by satellite, but they're small, little, really almost artisan providers of these services. And it's a reminder that this is what America was built on.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. And I think a really crucial aspect of that to highlight too is that, when you have that model, you are, really it's the reason we all love small businesses, right? Is that instead of all of these profits just sort of going to, wealthy shareholders in New York, right? And on Wall Street, you are keeping, all the money in Virginia so it can be reinvested in Virginia. So if it's a small company that, is, focused on, their county or their city or maybe a part of the state and trying to, build solar there or build wind there or, whatever it is that they want to do, they can hire people locally. They can, then keep those profits in those communities, like create sustainable, well-paying jobs. And, instead of the capital going to the Wall Street, so they can, put that wealth in any other state or just keep it for themselves, it, feels much more likely to actually stay in Virginia, which I think, would benefit all of us. And the transfer of wealth out of Virginia by Dominion in particular has just been a massive problem. So Virginians, I'm sure everyone listening probably feels that their energy bill is just way too high. That's how I feel. And, there's a lot of messaging and, you're constantly told, well, you need to, it's your fault because you use too much energy.
Yeah.
You don't, I don't unplug my TV when I leave to go to work. I know maybe I should, and I'm sure no one else, very few people really do that. But, but
Lizzie,
the reality is our bills are just too high because we're being overcharged. And Dominion has overcharged Virginians by $1.3 billion at minimum. Yeah. Since 2015, just in the last 3 years. And, that money's all, it's not going back to Virginians. We should be getting it as refunds. There was a great bipartisan bill to try to do that last session, but it was killed on just a razor thin margin in the Senate. But and now as we're all in a economic just standstill, obviously we're
Stasis,
starting to open up, but businesses have been forced to close. Families have been forced to stay at home and not be able to work, and when they want to go and work. And Dominion is giving their largest stock dividend that I've seen them give in years, maybe ever, to their shareholders in just 2 weeks. So it's just clearly not a system that's working for Virginia.
I thought it was interesting just this week, the very first African American ever appointed to the State Corporation Commission. And I'm like, how long have we had governors appointing people, and finally, trying to fight cronyism at the State Corporation Commission, you would hope, but here are government employees who are overseeing government contributors. You mentioned that this is bipartisan push to have these extensions moved or expanded. So who should we be calling, who are the good guys, who are the ones that need some encouragement in this, Lizzie?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And obviously, there's 140 members of the General Assembly, which is, so can't name everyone. But, in terms of the House of Delegates, the people who have really been leading this effort are Delegate Lee Ware, who represents Powhatan, and Delegate Jay Jones, who represents Norfolk. So, Delegate Ware is a Republican, Delegate Jones is a Democrat. They worked very closely together as the two chief patrons of this bill I mentioned earlier that was trying to make sure our the bills we pay, it was called the Fair Energy Bills Act, to make sure that the bills we pay are actually fair. And the SEC has just had its authority stripped away over the last decade in particular, so that they just can't do their job because they're no longer legally allowed to actually make sure the bills we pay reflect cost and Dominion's fair but not unlimited profit. And so those two delegates are the ones who really spearheaded that effort. Yeah. In the Senate, Senator Suderline and Senator Stewart have long been great on this issue. Senator Stewart gave a couple great floor speeches back in February, early March, on these issues. Senator McClellan has also done a really great job leading on this. So, there's a lot of people, and, some of them, like Delegate Ware, has been doing amazing work on this for a very long time. He's one of the most senior members of the House. But, there's a lot more people who, as I mentioned earlier, are just really starting to pay attention to this. And I think it's because, Dominion's just overreached so far. So
and actually, some of these districts that nobody expects to be competitive, there was an independent challenger to longtime Senator Cree Deeds, in which this was one of the center squares of the campaign of Elliot Harding running for that seat. Was taking money from Dominion and then trying to oversee them, and actually scored a lot of points for the independent candidate there, Lizzie. So that going forward, do you expect this to resurface as an election issue in 2021? I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We're still working on the extension. Do you think it'll be an extension or perhaps even a forgiveness that could come out of this? Yeah,
so I would say that, at minimum, we're hoping for an extension. And part of the reason, and this is, we joined, Clean Virginia joined a bunch of other groups in submitting a comment to the SEC on this, which is, a lot of other states like North Carolina have just been collecting a lot of data about this exact, problem. And so in North Carolina, they know, exactly how much money would have been charged in late fees, without this moratorium. They know exactly how many accounts would have been disconnected, for each of the utility providers. They know, just a great fidelity of information. And we have not been compelling our utilities to give that information.
Unbelievable.
And, a reporter asked a senior executive at Dominion about it, and they sort of, kind of declined to offer any of it up. And so something that, we're really hoping for is, we can't make a plan until we know what the problem is. And so, we, and this is also something that the legislators called for, which is, we need to collect good information. But, in terms of the question of, do we want forgiveness or what do we want to do with this? I think a really important thing to remember is that, we've essentially already paid for this, right? That every single, utility bill that you pay, every single power bill, every single month, particularly if you're in Dominion service territory, it is a little bit different if you live in a cooperative. But if you're in an investor-owned utility, and APCO, has been overcharging as well, but just, not nearly to the same scale as Dominion, you have been paying more than you should on every single bill, and Dominion has just pocketed all that money. So a lot of people, like to point out, well, I don't want to have to pay, I'm worried that, other people might be taking advantage of this, and I don't want to have to pay for someone else. But the reality is we've all already paid for this. And this is something the Attorney General pointed to as well in the comments he filed, which is, we should look at making Dominion shareholders pay for this. And, like I mentioned earlier, Dominion shareholders just got the largest stock dividend. I think, and again, I was sort of only just crunching these numbers, but it looks like, maybe that they've ever gotten.
Which you wonder where it came from, right?
In the last several years.
Yeah. Yeah, you wonder what generated that, if pun intended, if they're not generating electricity, and that's to the point, to small and responsive versus big and autocratic. A small and responsive company knows their customers and says, "Oh, okay, he's been furloughed for the," and we're talking about major employers. We're not just talking about mom and pop shops. We're talking about hundreds of people at the University of Virginia Health System or Inova Health that have been furloughed for months on end and have no way of paying their electric bills, but are told that their kids have to go to school online, and those kind of things. That's the kind of catch-22 we seem to be creating with this, Lizzie.
No, absolutely. And then, to make that even more complicated, right, there are people who, like if you are diabetic, right, that puts you at higher risk of serious complications from COVID-19. And it also means that, you have to store your insulin in a refrigerator. So, if you're told to stay at home and, you're diabetic, you can't stay at home without power. And so, it just sort of impacts every part of our life here. And everything you said is exactly right. And so, and I think that important thing to remember is that, these are people who want to go to work. But, this is the time where we put public health first. And so, it's just when we look at that situation where we have so many people who want to go to work, but as you said, they've been furloughed, they need to have power. We're about to go into the summer, and, everyone who lives here knows what summer in Virginia is like.
Oh, yeah. It already is. It's not even summer yet, and it's already like that.
Yeah.
Lizzie, again,
it's been 90 degrees here already. So.
Yeah, and with 90% humidity. Cleanvirginia.org. Lizzie Hylton, Policy Director, thank you so much for what you do. Read the piece, The Dominion Scam, and SCC Extends Ban on Utility Service Disconnects Until. And read in, take action. Appreciate Lee Ware, Dave Suterline, and all the folks who are helping out with that. I really appreciate your visit this week. Thank you so much for taking your time out. I hope everyone is well in your world, and you're on the right track. Absolutely. Let's keep fighting the good fight.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you all for listening this week to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. On behalf of all of us here, not just Sam and Lizzie, but all of us at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, I am Joe Thomas. Until next week, so long, and thanks for all the fish.